sporting side was Fred Truman, who lived in the next door village to us.
Oh, wow.
And was something of a very famous character, both obviously on the field and off. I can remember an occasion he went to the local pub and drank 32 pints of beer in 2 sessions. I'm glad to say not one.
I was going to say, or 2 sessions like that, just like cricket, right?
Yeah. So, no, you're right. And sort of people like Brian Close and those sort of people were stars. And interestingly, in Upper Wharfdale, when I was, they formed rugby clubs, football clubs, which all sort of started, bearing in mind, all this sort of really happened in the 50s and 60s, so early days. And I've had mentors throughout my life, people who I've relied on.
From Coordinate Sports, it's The Drive Phase, a show about sports founders, leaders and experts, and the stories behind their business journeys. Our guest this episode is Peter Roberts, Chairman of Gymfinity Kids Clubs and Nurseries. Peter is an example to entrepreneurs and leaders in the leisure sector. His largest and most high-profile exit came with Pure Gym. However, he has launched and exited 8 businesses and currently holds multiple investment and leadership positions in leisure businesses, including team sport indoor karting. His latest venture, Gymfinity Kids, is an exciting combination of gymnastics coaching and childcare, set in state-of-the-art facilities, with many of the successful Pure Gym team joining to execute the expansion plan. We discuss the genesis of the idea, market positioning, and the rollout plans. During the episode, we hear about Peter's early life and influences in Yorkshire, as well as his approach to building a team and the resources required for success. So get a pen and paper ready to take notes from a pioneer and an entrepreneur that continues to develop our sector. Enjoy the show.
I'm delighted to welcome Peter Roberts to the show today, Chairman of Gymfinity Kids, the rapidly growing gym club and nursery chain focused on children's movement, nourishment and development. Peter is also an inspirational figure to a lot of entrepreneurs out there, having launched and scaled and exited multiple businesses. In addition to Gymfinity, currently holds numerous roles as an investor and executive in companies throughout our sector, so hospitality and leisure. So a real privilege to have him on today. Welcome to the show, Peter.
Thank you. I'm pleased to be here.
Really fantastic to have you with us. And I know a lot of people will know you from your business career and specifically some of the big successes you've had. But generally what we tend to do is trying to get to know you a little bit better for the listeners. We take it back to, because we talk about children and children's development, sport, etc. We'll try and go back to your childhood and ask you how that was for you and how would you describe your childhood growing up?
Well, I was born in the Yorkshire Dales, north of Skipton, on a farm. So my early days were very farming orientated, but I was sent away to school in the south for whatever reason. I don't know. Unfortunately, both my parents died when I was relatively young, so I never really had a chance to find out why. But so I went to prep school in the south, and then I went to rugby school in the Midlands, but maintained a very strong interest in rural life and farming, as my father farmed, obviously in holidays and whatever. And that followed through I struggled pretty much at school, to be honest. Didn't do particularly well in exams. And whereas my siblings, my father had gone to Oxford University, I actually decided to go to Cirencester Agricultural College, because that's really where my love was. And I spent 3 years there, got my chartered surveyor's exams, and then joined a firm of chartered surveyors in the northwest of England at Kirkby Lonsdale. So early parts were very agricultural, rural dominated, and it was a great fun, to be honest.
Yeah, and I'm thinking about, I guess from a sporting perspective as a child, I know we're going to talk about Gymfinity, assuming there was nothing like that around at that time. And I'm thinking from being a born and raised proud Yorkshireman, cricket, would that be a big thing for you at the time? Cricket?
Yeah, indeed. Played for the local village outfit, and living in the Dales, I suppose exercise was very dominant.
Baked into lifestyle, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I always had a passion for walking and running in those days. And at school, much took part in really cricket, hockey, rugby, all of those and running, all of which were of interest, but didn't really excel in any of them. Did reasonably well, but I certainly didn't excel.
We tend to ask as well, given that we're talking about kind of children's development, etc., if there was any role models for you, and it must have been obviously a difficult time losing your parents at a young age. Is there anyone kind of springs to mind in terms of role model from whether it's a sporting perspective or even entrepreneurial, like you've gone on to do fantastic things? Was there anyone you can think back and think they were?
Well, I think the obvious one, I suppose, on the sporting side was Fred Truman, who lived in the next door village to us.
Oh, wow.
And was something of a very famous character, both obviously on the field and off. I can remember an occasion he went to the local pub and drank 32 pints of beer in 2 sessions. I'm glad to say not one.
Or 2 sessions, like that, just like cricket, right?
Yeah. So no, you're right. And sort of people like Brian Close and those sort of people were stars. And interestingly, in Upper Wharfdale, when I was, they formed rugby clubs, football clubs, which all sort of started, bearing in mind, all this sort of really happened in the 50s and 60s, so early days. And I've had mentors throughout my life, people who I've relied on. My father actually was, in his early days, was an entrepreneur. I'm not sure he realized it, but he started off a thing called Halifax Dairies, which then became Associated Dairies, became Asda. And he did things like producing the first polled cattle. Polled cattle means naturally bred without horns. He brought those in from Canada, and he was the first person in the Dale to have a tractor, I know.
So sorry, just
is that entrepreneurial?
Just so I understand it, is that your father launched that business, so effectively you could claim that he founded Asda, right?
Well,
I got that wrong.
Yes, and he gave up when it became Associated Dairies. But no, He and his brother were entrepreneurs in that sense. He started off as a lawyer, got fed up with being a lawyer, and then went farming instead. So farming and a bit of an entrepreneurialism. But I wasn't aware of that, to be honest, when I was young.
I guess fast forwarding through school, like you mentioned, in terms of academics, obviously being in those institutions, I'm assuming academics was highly prized. Did you find it difficult like I said, you mentioned difficult in school, but was that just purely down to the way things were taught?
I think the short answer is, in early life, as the Dales, I never had any education. So I didn't go to any local school. I went to Sunday religious school. I can remember that when I was, very young. But other than that, until I went to prep school, I had virtually no education at all. So I suppose I was starting on the back foot anyway.
Right.
And, to be honest, I didn't particularly enjoy school life anyway. I enjoyed the sports element of it. I didn't enjoy the academic element so much. So I suppose it really wasn't until my parents both died when I was in my teens that I realized I was going to have to pull myself together. I was on my own. I had an elder brother and sister, but they were away doing other things. So I sort of realized that I was going to have to pull myself together and sort myself out.
Yeah, a lot of responsibility. I know we've only got a limited amount of time, so I could talk to you for hours on this subject, but just if we fast forward to, you mentioned accountants, you'd gone into the chartered surveyors, and given what you were saying, was that, I don't know if that was your kind of dream to be in that industry or not? And I'm guessing I'm trying to get to the point where did you start feeling that frustration as an entrepreneur to think, I want to get out of my own?
It was doing all the things that I had a background in. So it was mainly looking after people's farms and estates. So to that extent, I was out of doors a lot, going to lots of different places. And so that was all really a great follow-on from what my life had been early doors. And it was taking part in the north of England, which I'm very dear to. But then something sort of really came up. I wanted to develop the firm. The firm was 4 partners, of which I was the youngest. They were all really pretty happy with how it went on, so didn't want to do much expansion. And an opportunity came up for me with a friend to support 2 people who were running or opening a restaurant in Manchester. And that was, I suppose, my first introduction to, A, to hard business, and B, being an entrepreneur, I suppose.
Yeah, and I guess so that decision to to move into, I guess, entrepreneurship and run? I know restaurant business isn't always the easiest, right, in terms of success rates and stuff.
No.
Was that a bit of a baptism of fire going straight into that?
Oh, good Lord, yes. I mean, talk about innocence abroad, that my partner and I really hadn't a clue. What we did know that was two guys we supported were great cooks, but they were bad businessmen. So it won the equivalent of a Michelin star in Manchester. Wow. And went bust about a year later for all the reasons that we know. And I don't think we were of much help other than going there and probably eating and drinking at the restaurant. It was a great restaurant. It did really well in terms of its culinary aspects, but it was an eye-opener and revealed just how innocent abroad I was. And luckily, in those days, I was still with my firm, Davis and Bowring, in the north of England. So I still had an income coming in and wasn't relying on that. And in fact, went on doing little bits and bobs of getting involved with people. I actually got involved with starting a outdoor water park in Portugal. So funny things like that came up, but while I was still employed. So it was a very good grounding on what happens when you start off from scratch. And I suppose my one that I was the most serious was I went in with some friends and we bought an old caravan park in the Southern Lake and turned it into a holiday lodge accommodation unit. Again, when I look back, I couldn't read a balance sheet. I hardly knew what a profit and loss account was. So one was running it on instinct, I suppose. And it was a reasonable success. I mean, we made a little bit of money, traded it, but it learned an awful lot. And I suppose that was then the grounding for me to go forward into more serious businesses.
Yeah, so at this stage, I guess just looking at kind of timelines and things, at this stage, you still with your, kind of still got a day job and this is on, it's like side project, and then you've made this decision at that point to say, right, that we're going to maybe take it more seriously or go for a larger project and leave them, sink your teeth into it. And was that into the hospitality sector with the Hotel Tulips Hotel?
We went on, we sold the prospect Broughton in Furness, and then an opportunity came up, funny enough, for another caravan site in the heart of the Lake District, in Delta Water. And that was a much, much bigger project. So we built 120 holiday lodges there, rebuilt, it was a gunpowder works. So we rebuilt the gunpowder works into a hotel and built the second all proper indoor leisure centre, believe it or not. The first one was at Glen Eagles, and we were second. And my idea then was to create something which I was convinced if we gave the right conditions, that even in the wettest part of the Lake District, we could have tourists there 365 days a year. So we did a lot of research. I went to Germany looking at similar places there, and we went to Norway to find the very best lodges, which were all triple glazed, very highly insulated. And I can remember going there, and it was something like -20 outside, and we were all dripping with sweat inside these lodges because they were so well insulated. So setting the whole thing up was fascinating. As I said, a big, big project, of which there was no real precedent in the UK. So we were learning as we went.
Do you think, just curiosity, because we may be going off topic a little bit, but do you think you are kind of drawn to those large scale projects, or say if it's not big enough, it's not really, I guess, doesn't grab your attention or interest in terms of, because for me that going from scratch,
well, yeah,
talk about how that's financed and how you put something together like that and build the team and stuff. But is it almost like if it's not big enough, it's not interesting?
All the things that I personally have been involved with have started from scratch, but with an idea that they had some blue sky out there. You know, I think you can do small projects, whatever, but it's not going to get very far. So the idea was, and you know, as I said, it took us 2 years to get planning permission, a lot of work involved on developing the actual units. The site was very hilly, etc. So I could see the potential there was enormous. Its location was fantastic. The actual site itself was fantastic. And it was all about creating something that people felt that they could go any time of the year. And surprisingly, we were full literally all the year round because it was so comfortable. We had the indoor leisure centre, which people could swim and play, squash and games and that sort of thing. And then a backup of the hotel for food and beverage. So it did achieve all those things.
And I guess that model has been replicated now with big, probably Centre Park, stuff like that. That model's still remains successful. In terms of that kind of blue sky thinking and initiating, I know it's going to be a lot easier for you now, given all the success, but raising funds at the time for such a big project, was that difficult for you, or was it just kind of based on the network you had and you had good partners on board early stages?
I was very fortunate that I had 7 good backers who came in. And remembering this was in the early 80s, things were a lot cheaper then. And, we raised £800,000 to do this project initially, which in today's high inflation, of course, we'd had inflation in the 70s then, but
the interest rates must have been higher back in the 80s, right?
Yeah, they were. So we didn't borrow any money to start with, and we had another round after the 800. But the great thing was, and one of my key points in all this is you've always got to have a good business partner in there. And I was lucky enough to find a guy who became my sales and marketing partner, really. And I shall never forget, I said to him, how are you going to market time? We did it under a timeshare lodges when you got no knowledge of it at all. And he said, I've sold lead paint to the Russians, he said, so this will be very easy.
It's going to be easy, man.
And he was right. But he'd worked for Procter and Gamble and he was a pure marketeer, knew exactly what he was talking about. But the point was, this was something that I knew little about. He did. My sort of property development background and his sales and marketing background were a great combo, to be honest. And then the people we had on the board were there to help on the financial side. So it got off to a very quick start. So our cash flow was fantastically good, and that then allowed us to borrow money. So we were lucky that, we just got running early doors, and, the cash flow was always ahead of our building requirements.
And it feels like obviously you've got it's evident from kind of your history in terms of seeing the gap in the market for that product and slotting it in there to say, well, this isn't currently available. Let's provide something that the demand's there, but the customer doesn't know that they need it yet, if that makes sense. So, and I don't want to, we could spend so much time, and I don't want to kind of fast forward big, huge successes, but I mentioned about your kind of next foray, or maybe it wasn't, but in terms of the Tulips Hotel Group, and that was another successful exit, right, at that stage.
Yeah.
Did you operate that? You were operating that business for you?
Yeah, that actually started out. We sold Langdale, which is the Lake District one, to Scotch Newcastle, because they just bought Centre Parks at that stage. So for them, they wanted to find out how to get in. And as an offshoot from that, I'd also started a nightclub business called Luminar and a restaurant business called Country Style Inns. And we ran Luminar went public in 95 or 6, and we sold the restaurant business at the same time. And so I was then kicking around thinking what to do next. And the idea came of doing value hotels, because for those who remember that the market was dominated by effectively Premier Inn and Travelodge, and there were no other value-based hotels in those days. What I wanted to do was something a little bit better, still value-orientated, but a bit more comfortable, because those basic hotels were pretty basic in those days. They were very good value, but I thought there was a market for someone who wanted something a little bit better. So whereas probably Premier were charging, in those days, probably under 20 quid a night, I wanted to offer something between 25 and 30 quid a night, but rather more comfortable. So that's how we got into that, bought 3 individual hotels in Harrogate, Edinburgh, and I can't remember what the third one was. And anyway, the idea was to cut our teeth and find out if it worked, if the idea worked. And then, which it did, particularly Edinburgh was very, very successful. But they were old buildings, which were difficult to manage. There was always something wrong with them.
Maintenance, yeah.
And so we wanted to find new building, and perchance I found a site opposite Manchester United Football Club, which was just a site. So this was our first one. And obviously it would have been very expensive to build. And also I felt that this was an opportunity to piggyback on a good name. So I knocked on the door of David Gill at the time, who was the managing director. I said, David, who was a great guy, I said, if you look out of your window, there's a bit of land over there, which I want to develop as a hotel. Would you be interested in coming in? And for some extraordinary reason, they said yes. So we built the Golden Tulip Hotel there, and it was great. So we got involved with Alex Ferguson, all the players of the time, the Coles and that, who all came over, and Scholes, I remember coming, and every time we did something on the hotel, they all came over and lay on beds and that sort of thing. So that was great success. Then we decided we'd roll that out. Manu kept in with us, and we got further funding in, and we're developing that till the late 90s and early century. And we'd got to, we'd built about 10 and had about 15 in the pipeline. And interestingly, Whitbread came along. We were irritating them because we were pretty
sure. Yeah. So at that time, they owned Premier Inn, right? Did they have Travelodge? Did they have Travelodge?
Yeah, they had Premier, yeah.
Premier, yeah.
And they were we were irritating them because we beat them to the punch on finding sites, even though our covenant was obviously not well known. So anyway, they bought us out, which, as it turned out, was very fortuitous because we then had a major financial crunch. Thinking.
So this is kind of the 2007-8 big credit crunch, right? Okay.
I think we probably would have gone bust.
I was going to say, yeah, because
but we had we'd got all these 10 sites lined up, and we wouldn't have found the money to be able to develop them. Because suddenly, if you remember, the banks just closed off and said, no more lending.
No more lending, yeah.
And we probably couldn't have raised enough equity. So we were actually quite fortunate. And I remember Premier, there were 2 of them nearly finished, and they finished them off and then never opened them for 2 years. It's extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary.
Why was that just... Why wouldn't they open them? Is that just because they're working capital?
I never found out.
Yeah,
I think they were worried about the market too, because if you remember, everything was awful then.
Yeah, similar to nowadays. I'm really curious. So at that point, you kind of, there's 2 exits to talk about. So you're, again, 2008. This is got some time on your hands, I'm assuming, and just the way you've been describing it, I'm guessing when you start traveling around looking at things, and it's kind of, that's how you do your ideas start percolating, and you want to go. Did you have a view at that time to say, I'm just out to look for anything in hospitality, or was it specifically fitness, gyms, or did you hear about something?
I think based on 2 things. One is obviously my background was property, so I'm not a techie, but I understand property. So wanted to do something in hospitality and leisure, which had a property base about it, because that's what I understood. And my other thing is finding something is disruptive, which is a real differentiator. I say to all my entrepreneurs, you've got to think about differentiating. You can get something which is basic, whether it's fitness, hospitality, whatever it is, but you've got to find an angle that no one else is doing, or you can disrupt what everyone else is doing. And so I was thinking, what are we going to do next? And I was like fortunate. Literally met a guy in the pub who said, have you heard about low-cost gyms? Which I hadn't. And he gave me the spiel, and I thought, this is too good to be true. But there were none in the UK. So I went to America and Germany, where they were, funnily enough, very well established. Thought it was a fantastic model. But the thing that bugged me was, why on earth has no one brought it to the UK?
Yeah, well, it's one of those things. If you ask, I guess, even now, some people with health club membership, if you ask someone with a gym membership back then, what do you hate about it? They'll probably tell you all of the things that you didn't have, right? So I'm tied into the contract. I can't get out of the contract. It cost me X amount. So
they were, I mean, it was so basic. It was so obvious that it was rather worrying. As you said, everyone did contracts. You could only get a membership by having a show round. Times were restricted and costs were averaging 45 quid a month. So we went in then at 15 quid a month, 24 hours a day and no contract. And our only problem at the beginning, everyone thought if it's that cheap, it must be rubbish.
I'm curious on that one in terms of, is that purely the economics behind it? Is it that the gyms were trying to make that a bigger margin? That's why they were charging so much? Or because I always look at it and think about kind of local authorities and what they could have done with their gyms, etc. And they tend to not want to go below a certain price. This is me looking from the outside. Is it the economics that they just want to have a larger margin, or what were you doing differently to?
No, I think they were much more serviced. So we, for example, ended up with two managers, general manager, and then we used the PTs to take up the time when the regular people were working there. Yeah. So their costs were a lot higher, and all the marketing, all ours was online. We didn't have a reception. People went in there. Our costs were heavily reduced, so that we didn't need to charge that because they were fully serviced and very often had swimming pools, this sort of thing, which cost a lot of money, which is so really why they had to. And the market was very much market and top end. No one knew about the bottom end.
Yeah, and I feel like even though we're talking about kind of low cost gyms, it's kind of low cost but good value at the same time. So it's never doesn't feel budget like you've got all brand new equipment, etc.
No. I mean, our equipment, frankly, was better than anyone's. I mean, we spend a lot of money. We spend about 350,000 quid on pure equipment in each unit. So it was probably rather better than anyone else's, even at the top end.
And I really want to get on to talking about Gymfinity and kind of the origin story of that. With Pure Gym, I think common knowledge, huge exit there, and it was into private equity, United States, US private equity came in for that one.
We had an interim sale. It was all funded by private people who backed me before initially, and then we had an interim sale to an American private equity company, and then we ran that for 5 years for them, and then we had a major. Because they were based in London, wanted to leave London, so they wanted to sell out. So we had a major sale process, and it went to a San Francisco private equity holder who still holds it now, actually. And I think they've been very good and very supportive.
And one thing we always talk about with most of the guests is in terms of the importance of building a team. And that for you, like you said, you always get people on board that have those complementary skills. And I'm assuming over the time of the successes and the exits, have you built up a close team, like kind of almost like an inner circle that are moving with you? And if that was the case, were any of those guys having to stay on at Pure Gym, like kind of earn-outs or anything like that, before you could start the next?
They all did. As I said, key people, I think, are absolutely fundamental. And as I said, I always say to people, start doing these things entirely on your own is bloody difficult. It is, because A, you haven't got all the knowledge. But B, more importantly, it's stressful, very hard work. And so building a team around you. And I remember, particularly at Pure Gym, the guys that board, and we had a very good board, said, the first thing you've got to do is put a management team in place before we really expand this business, which we did. Which was a risk because it may have gone wrong. But as a result, we got some really good people in sales and marketing, finance, development, property, all those sides of it, who were actually held in for a while when we sold Pure Gym. Pleased to say that we've got 90% of them over to start Gymfinity.
And I'm assuming after the exit, obviously if you found yourself with some more time on your hands to research the market and look for new opportunities, was it something that you obviously knowing that you had that kind of interim sale and with the view for the exit, maybe you knew that was happening, were you already looking for your next opportunity, or was it something that was...
No, we were too busy at Pure Gym. At that stage, we were nearly up to 200 gyms. We're 180, I think. So it was pretty full on. And then, of course, the whole process of doing the sale is amazingly time consuming. So that was full on. So no, may have had a few little thoughts in the back of my mind, but didn't really concentrate on it until I left Pure Gym.
So I guess it's a good time for us to talk about Gymfinity and kind of the USP differentiated, like you said. Was it your first instinct into looking at the kind of children's sector? Was it around thinking this can be done better, or was it meet someone in a pub again, maybe who said, have you seen what's happening with the kind of the gym in the UK?
There was general discussion then about children's, I suppose a lot of it came, about children's physical state, a lot of it, obesity was very much an in vogue discussion at the time. And also I had seen that a lot of schools were really cutting back on their general physical practicalities that they were able to do. So, sports fields were going away, less emphasis on exercise, etc. So it seemed to me that there was a gap in the market, although lots of mama and papa type people doing gymnastics, for example, there was no one doing it really seriously. I think there was a couple of professional gymnasts were doing it, but not for recreational, they were doing it for competition reasons. Yeah. So the market, to me, appeared to be very, disorientated and disintegrated, really. And I did feel that there was a need to provide something much better and much more varied for young children going forward.
I'm interested in the kind of the model. I know the differentiators that you have. It might be worth looking at those shortly, but in terms of the initial research, and I know you definitely do your research, we've previously on the show, we've had Corey from my gym over in the US, based out of California, and their model is very much franchise model. I'm curious in terms of, do you look at, maybe because you pop at your background, do you look at a rollout of Gymfinity in a franchise model, or would it be exactly the same as kind of wholly owned each site?
Yeah, we went to, again, as part of the research, rather boring to say again, but we went to America because we knew that it was much more mature. Picked up a lot of good ideas there. And as you say, a lot of it was franchise. But what I did pick up was not that easy necessarily, but either from the franchisee or the franchisor, particularly again, when it involves sort of mama and papa type franchises. So we decided that we wanted to roll this out ourselves. This is where we had experience of doing it, obviously with, hotels and pubs and nightclubs that were all rollouts. So this was the obvious thing that we should take this up and do it ourselves. But what we are doing is for overseas looking at franchising, and we're in the process of thinking that at the moment, but it will be based on probably on master franchises, where you go and give it to one or two people in a country rather than getting involved on a individual franchise basis.
And then they would roll it out as a franchise or potentially roll it out as a rollout like yourselves?
Yeah, exactly. And we've already had people talking to us about that. So that'll be one of the next stages of our development.
And in terms of the actual offer, for our listeners as well, because you're combining kind of three elements. You've got the gymnastics, obviously Ninja, and the nurseries on site as well, which is a huge, for me anyway, is a huge differentiator. Someone looking for childcare has that built-in facility and activities. Was that something that you kind of put together with the team, brought on specialist gymnastics people? I know you've got a team of kind of ambassadors, and curious about the nutritional side as well. I mean, providing meals and things like that. Yeah, I mean,
we started off purely on gymnastics, got hold of some people who already run in that sector to try and find out, again, how we could differentiate, how we could do it better. One of the problems was, and again, we were new to this, so, we had to learn from square one again. One of the problems was that although you had a certain amount of preschool, most of it was post-school, so started 3:30 on till 7 or 8 at night. There was nothing happening in that space, which was quite big, 12,000 square foot, between probably 10 o'clock in the morning and 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
This is something our listeners will relate to, definitely. Like the demand is really sits kind of after school time, doesn't it, for the specific classes? So finding something to utilize the time of your staff and facilities
So that was in terms of utilization per square foot of space was awful. So we then we really sat down with the cold towel and thought, what are the alternative things we went through? We went to, offering craft centers and all sorts of different things. Anyway, in the end, we thought the most applicable, which was applicable to the kids, obviously, was a nursery. So we started up a nursery, which really means now that we can look after those children from 0 to 12, 13, 14. And it also means the nursery children can spend more time in a gymnastics area, albeit very simple. It's about flexibility, learning how to do basic stuff, which they wouldn't necessarily get in an ordinary nursery in someone's home or in a small outfit. So that, to us, is really, really important, is the physical development, as well as the other points you mentioned, the physicality, nutrition, cognitive development, we think is really important. And I think what is relevant at the moment is, post-COVID, there's a lot of kids out there have really suffered because they haven't obviously been to school or had much opportunity to get out. And what we're trying to do is to rectify that in working along, the key things of, exercise, nutrition, and development in both cognitive and physical needs.
Yeah, I think those fundamentals that's one of the reasons we talked about the obesity situation with children at the moment, and those fundamentals, having those from an early age, tends to mean that people stay physically active more often, don't drop off when they can't do something. So I'm really curious about we talked about the cost base in Pure Gym, and Gymfinity feels, I'll not say it's like super premium, but the quality's there, if that makes sense. They've got a real good focus on quality across all the areas. Now with nurseries as well, is that different? Obviously it's a different approach from value gyms, etc. How has the strategy had to change there to incorporate I'm assuming, additional cost of quality cost money, right? So
Yeah, I mean, very different in that it's much more people orientated and qualified people orientated. And again, post-COVID hasn't been particularly easy. Funnily enough, on the gymnastics front, because a lot of people come in part-time, we can accommodate that. There's not many of our coaches, for example, work full-time. They may come in for 3 days a week, 2 days a week. So that makes life a lot easier. Obviously, on the nursery side, one needs fully qualified grade 3 people working with children, and that's absolutely fundamental. So that, yes, the model is very different. It's not trying to be value orientated. It's trying to offer a better experience to children than they can necessarily get somewhere else.
How are you finding, I guess this may be a wider conversation, but not just our sector, but recruitment and recruiting good people, especially young people as well, is difficult at the moment. We're finding it within our sector. Are you seeing the same thing? Obviously, It's a great proposition, but how's recruitment going? Obviously, as you're looking to do a rollout and expansion, is that a challenge for you?
Yeah, very much so. No, recruitment, and I'm involved with a lot of other entrepreneurial businesses, and recruitment is definitely a big factor at the moment. I'm not sure people entirely know why. I think some of it is Brexit related, where there were a lot of, I think, particularly Eastern Europeans who were working over here when Brexit came, went home again and have stayed home.
You see that with agriculture for sure.
Yeah, but I think across leisure and hospitality as well. Yeah. And I mean, I know here locally where I am in Yorkshire, there's not many of the pubs and bars open on a Monday and a Tuesday, and that's because they can't get the staff to run it. So, it is a real problem. And I think there's an element of change of behavioral attitude of people. Funny enough, COVID, they sat at home, they survived, they probably saved a bit of money. And I'm not sure that, I think there has been an attitude change. And I don't know how this is going to work out. I just don't think there are as many people who want to get out there and necessarily do the hard yard work than there would have been before. But I can't prove that. But there is definitely a problem throughout, I think, the leisure and hospitality industry.
Yeah, and I think also there's kind of the maybe just anecdotally, but with this kind of options, right? So previously a coach or an instructor, gymnastics might have earned a certain hourly rate, which now with kind of living wage, etc., that is comparable to I could work in loads of different places that potentially aren't as skilled and still earn the same amount. So yeah, it's a challenge. I'm just curious for your take on it, because it's a challenge that everyone's kind of facing.
Very much so. And getting, the right caliber of people, which in our industry is absolutely vital. We are working with children. You cannot possibly afford other than have the really, really well graduated people and educated that they know exactly what they're doing.
What's next for, I'm assuming, expansion, obviously, but what does that look like? And I know you probably behind the initial schedule with COVID and the impact of that. But what does it look like? 3 to 5 years, or have you got a plan to grow to 200 locations, or what's your...
I think obviously COVID really affected. We did nothing for 2 years. We were effectively closed down for 1.5 of those. So we did nothing. Cash was leaking out of the back door anyway. We were very fortunate. We'd raised funds, and we've raised more funds since. So that's put us on a footing where we can now start rolling out in different areas. And I think, a lot of the early units have taught us quite a lot about location, where we should be. As I said, when we started off, we were pretty innocents abroad. So the key things like you must have good outside light coming in. You've got to have outside areas for exercise. You've got to have really good parking, ease of access for parents for drop off and this sort of thing. So we've learned that probably the hard way over the last 3 years because of COVID. So we've developed some good models on site finding, and we've got a good team involved. So we're now starting to look at new sites to develop. Interestingly, when we started off, we were looking at sort of warehouse type units. What with, again, COVID, Amazon, all that sort of home deliveries, those have all gone mad in terms of rental. So, we have to be very, very careful in our site selection.
Because if you start falling into the retail side, then it's even more expensive, right?
Exactly, yeah. Retail parks are good because obviously there are other things that people can go and do, and there's parking easy. But funnily enough, the occupancy in retail parks is holding up pretty well. Bad in town and city centres and shopping malls and everything, but retail parks has held up pretty well. But depending how bad our economic situation gets, we think there will be more sites become available.
Yeah, and I guess that's the conflict, I guess, because in the city centres, there's probably a lot of incentive to move into the local areas, councils, etc., trying to get people in. And I'm sure Gymfinity is really attractive to them, but for you, is that almost not the right location for parents who, if they're not going into the city centres as it is as well?
Again, it comes things like access and parking, vital. And someone doesn't want to be sitting in a traffic jam with a young child screaming for hours on end. So, access to getting to it is really important, and parking is really important, and that is in some of the city centres is a challenge. So that's why ideally edge of narrow residential area, good parking and that sort of thing is very important.
Just conscious of your time and kind of switching gears a little bit in terms of maybe more personal for yourself, questions around how you kind of operate the business. So there's a lot going on. Like I said, we're just talking about Gymfinity. You've got all kind of other interests. One question I had was in terms of when you get involved in a business, are you always invested in that, or are you chairman of a lot? Are you invested in those businesses as well, or is it kind of sitting on the board first?
I try and invest in anything that I'm involved in mentoring or sitting on boards of, definitely. I think it shows that you've got some reliance on the management team and whatever else is happening. So I think it's always pretty important.
Yeah, you've got that skin in the game as well. So how do you manage your time then in terms of obviously stress management is one thing, having a good team around you is good, but you must have so many demands on your time, and how do you spread yourself across everything?
Even in Gymfinity, I'm non-executive, or I'd like to think reasonably active non-exec, and take a keen interest in areas where I feel I can help or add some value.
Is that difficult to not get too involved? Obviously, you trust your team, I suppose.
I've got a bit old. No, and as I said, we've got a really good team of guys, so I don't need to be honest. I'm there as a sounding board or an adding board if I can help in any way. But on a day-to-day basis, those guys run it perfectly well, and I suppose I'm the interface between them and the board as well. On some of the other younger businesses, on specific aspects, one has to become more involved, I suppose.
Definitely. And then do you have any, talked about kind of active lifestyle and being out in the countryside, etc., and kind of your lifestyle, but do you have anything that you kind of go to for like kind of habits or routines, like whether it's walking, reading? What's the kind of go-to thing for you to switch on?
Yes, I'm both. I'm a great walker still and a great reader. I try and and a great traveller. I really enjoy travelling, so we make sure that we get abroad and see different places and different things. I'm a bit of a wine ball buff as well, so I've always had an interest in that. That's been something that's fascinated me, and really all outdoor life. I'm very keen, fun enough, on forestry and plants and things, and I've developed an arboretum of my own here at home. So there's a wide variety of things which hopefully get me away from the desk, traveling down to London, etc., and allow me to get out and have some fresh air.
Brilliant. And then just reflecting, if you were, a couple of questions that we asked, but I'm curious about, given all the successes you've had, if you were going to look back at your business career, what would you say is the biggest challenge you've had to face? And also which one of those businesses, and maybe it's yet to happen, gives you the most satisfaction? You think back and think, right, that deal that we did there was kind of remembered fondly.
I think in the early days, I suppose the biggest challenge was a lack of knowledge of finance. and I've now learned that the hard way. And it's things that happen which are outside your control. I'm a great believer. If you sweat hard enough, you can control a lot of the things that you're in charge of. But, we've had nasty things with banks coming in, nasty things with either politicians or anyone bringing in new laws, etc. So I think that, or economic crises. So things that have happened outside your control, which you maybe didn't see coming and should have seen coming, has been a general challenge. Other than that, obviously, which I've been very lucky in, is the challenge of people, getting the right people in the right place. And, that is fundamental. And at the end of the day, I always think for all these businesses, it's actually down to the people. Because you can come up with an idea, and you can work on that idea, or you can see what other people have come up with. But at the end of the day, it's the men who are developing and pushing that idea through who are going to make sure there's success or not. And so, I think it's people and people, finances, funding are the biggest challenges, I think, to any entrepreneurial business.
Yeah, and given that you've managed to execute so well over the years, which one would be your standout for you? Or maybe I guess it's like asking you which of your children's the favourite. But if you could pick one, or good memory thinking back, which one would it be?
Well, I suppose financially, and success-wise, it has to be Pure Gym, because that was a big success. But when I look back at some of the other ones, and I think I hadn't really a clue when I started off doing them, things like Langdale, the Holiday Cottage thing, which we really were entrepreneurial there because no one was doing that. When I look back on it, I thought, how on earth did we actually develop that when we
that's that. Yeah, I guess that's that naivety, just jumping into it, not knowing what you don't know about it.
Yeah, but that is what an entrepreneur does. You come up with an idea and then you drive it forward. And so, Langdale, and then fun enough, something I haven't mentioned, which I started a Himalayan garden at my previous home which I had no idea about. I had no idea about gardening and developed a 40-acre garden with Himalayan plants. And that, completely out of business terms, goes down because I really did learn from the seat of my pants.
Yeah.
And so something like that, I can see it's not a financial issue. It's something you can see everything growing and developing and other people being able to enjoy it. So, we have 30,000 people a year going around it. So there are different things in your life which give you different pleasures, I think.
Yeah, definitely different satisfactions, sure. Couple of questions left. If you were to just a lot of entrepreneurs listening, small business owners, and the outlook of the economy at the moment could be scary to people. For someone who's been through the ups and downs, you've seen recessions come and go. What would kind of your advice be to someone running a small business at the moment?
I think life is going to be tough. I was brought up, started work in the 70s, and God forbid it's like the 70s, because all I can remember at that time, it went on for an awful long time. It was 4 years, really, of hell. I pray that those who run our economy, etc., and outside influences allow that not to happen. But again, we're looking at what's happening in Gymfinity. If the opportunities come up, they're there to take. So in our case, if we can get sites cheaper, but generally, I think we're going to be very cautious. If interest rates really go very high, inflation continues to go very high, I think it's a question of knuckling down, I think, and just being quite canny over the next year and see what happens. Obviously, take opportunities where they come, but you've got to be sure that they're not going to bring you down.
Yeah.
And I think consumers will inevitably continue to tighten their belts for so long. So as entrepreneurial businesses, we all have to be aware of that, I think, and just keep our costs under control. And obviously, if one can, in all sorts of different ways, but I think be cautious would be my advice over the next 12 to 18 months.
Yeah. Appreciate that. And just final question we ask everyone this who comes on the show, and it's another reflective one. If you could go back in time and speak to yourself, to your younger self, so Peter just leaving university or just starting out in your career, what piece of advice would you go back and tell yourself?
Give yourself a good financial education and backing at the beginning, because the thing had always haunted me. I don't know how I got away with it because I was so naive. And I have to say the same with a lot of the entrepreneurs I see. They got brilliant ideas, but some of their basic knowledge the whole financial thing, whether it be fundraising, producing management accounts, understanding balance sheets, all that sort of thing, which is hellish boring for an entrepreneur. Yeah. But it really does help. And I see so many people who don't understand that bit. And I wish I'd gone and just taken a course in, I suppose, business management / financial management would have helped life a lot in my early days.
Brilliant. Yeah, definitely sound piece of advice for everyone to get those economics under control. Peter, thank you so much for your time. I really, really enjoyed it. And thanks for being so open with us.
Great. Well, thanks, James, and glad to have the time with you.
Thank you for listening to this week's show. You can subscribe anywhere you get your podcasts. If you'd like to get in touch with us, you can write to us at dryphase.podcast@coordinate.cloud, tweet us at coordinatesport, or follow us on Instagram at coordinate_sports, or on my account at James_ventures. This episode was produced by Nancy Kwamboka, with support from Claire Goodchild and Lola Small, with special thanks to Rochelle. I'm James Moore, and you've been listening to The Drive Phase from Coordinate Sport.